After I dropped my kid off at school, his teacher cornered me and asked, "Why is your son absent today?" "No, he's not." I just watched him walk inside. Mrs. Stevenson's face went pale. "Well, he didn't make it to my classroom." She looked at her attendance records. "In fact, Theo hasn't made it to my classroom at all for the past 3 weeks." My stomach dropped. "That's impossible," I stammered out. "I've been dropping him off every morning and staying until I personally see him go in." Mrs. Stevenson hesitated, then picked up her classroom phone. "I think you need to speak with Principal Miles right now." We walked through the hallway in silence. Other teachers kept glancing at us, then looking away quickly. The principal's secretary was already crying when we arrived, like she knew something. Principal Miles had security footage pulled up on his computer. "Come look at this." The screen showed the front entrance. There was Theo, scanning his ID badge at 7:46 a.m., walking toward the classroom with his dinosaur backpack. The timestamp read October 24th this morning. "Mr. Davis, watch what happens next." The camera angle switched to the main hallway. I could see Theo in the morning crowd of kids. He walked toward his classroom hallway, then suddenly veered left toward the gym. The timestamp showed 7:48 a.m., another camera angle, the gym hallway. Theo pushed through the emergency exit door. A man in a hard hat and construction vest was waiting. Theo climbed into a white pickup truck. They drove away. The timestamp, 7:49 a.m. "That's been happening every morning for 3 weeks. Miles's voice was shaking. "We presumed this was authorized." The man said he was Theo's uncle picking him up for family medical appointments. He showed me a folder, dozens of permission slips with my forged signature. "I've been trying to call you, but the number on file was disconnected." That's when Mrs. Stevenson interrupted. "Mr. Davis, there's something else. CPS is coming to your house today at 11 a.m. They received a report about educational neglect. If Theo isn't there, if we can't prove where he's been, you could lose custody." My hands were shaking as I pulled out Theo's phone from my pocket. He'd forgotten it in the car. The screen lit up with notifications. 47 unread messages. All from Uncle Mike. My blood went cold. Uncle Mike was Theo's stepdad's uncle. I opened the messages. "Don't tell your dad. You know what happens if you tell." The last message, sent this morning at 7:30 a.m. "If you don't come today, you'll never see your mom again." I called my ex-wife immediately. Voicemail. I called Derek, the stepdad. No answer. It was already 9:15 a.m., less than 2 hours until CPS arrived. Where would have taken Theo? I drove to Derek's apartment first. The landlord told me he'd left early this morning. I drove to my ex-wife's workplace next. Her boss said she hadn't been in all week. It all seemed super shady. That's when it hit me. Uncle Mike. I didn't know where he lived, but I knew he owned a construction company. I'd be able to confront Mike there. I drove to his main office and burst through the door. "Where's your crew working today?" The secretary looked scared. "Highway 40, the overpass project." I didn't even hesitate, just jumped in my car and started going 90 on the highway. After 35 minutes, I finally saw the construction site. Concrete mixers, bulldozers, the sound of machinery. I parked and ran through the gates, scanning every face, every corner. Looking for Mike so I could ask him what the hell was going on. That's when I saw him, Theo, my 11-year-old son. He was carrying a bag of cement on his small shoulders. His dinosaur backpack was thrown in the dirt. I saw angry red marks on his shoulders. Even worse, there were 5-hour energy drinks in his pocket, the kind that says, "Not for children" on the label. But why was Mike making my son work at a construction site? "Theo!" I called out. He turned and saw me. His face went white. He dropped the cement bag. "Dad? What are you doing here?" "I'm here to collect you, buddy." I walked over to him. That's when he said something that made my stomach turn. "But I can't leave Dad. Derek told me you'll be mad at me unless I work." I was still trying to piece it all together when I heard car doors slam shut. My ex-wife's Honda, Derek's truck. They walked over together, my ex-wife already defensive. "Theo has another 3 hours left on his shift," she said. "3 hours of what?" I asked, grabbing Theo and pulling him behind me. "His shift at the construction site? Where you've been keeping him hostage," I yelled. My ex-wife crossed her arms. "He's learning real skills. He's making us $1,800 a week. Theo's been earning money for his own family instead of wasting time on fractions." My jaw dropped. "You knew?" Of course I knew. It was my idea. What she didn't know was that authorities were on their way. "Derek's uncle needed workers," she continued, "and we needed money for my lawyer, for my custody case, to get Theo away from you forever." She jabbed her finger into my chest. I looked down at Theo. His shoulders were now shaking as he was definitely looking at his mom. "You said you were saving the money I made to buy me a birthday present." "I am," she quickly responded, lying through her teeth. The police showed up right in the middle of all this. The first officer out of the car held up his hand and told everyone to stay where they were. 3 more officers got out and spread across the construction site, moving between the workers and equipment. One officer walked straight to Uncle Mike and started asking questions about who was in charge here. Another officer came over to me and Theo, kneeling down to Theo's level. She asked him if he was hurt anywhere, and Theo nodded, pointing to his shoulders. The officer looked at the red marks, and then noticed the energy drink bottles sticking out of his pocket. She pulled out her radio and called for an ambulance, saying they needed medical evaluation and documentation on site. I was shaking so hard I could barely stand, but I forced myself to stay calm and answer questions clearly, because I knew losing my temper right now would make me look bad when CPS showed up. The lead officer asked Maya and Derek to step over to one side of the site while he talked to me. Theo kept looking back and forth between me and his mother, like he was trying to figure out who was going to get in trouble for all this. The female officer stayed with Theo, writing notes about his injuries and taking photos with her phone. She explained to me that documenting his physical condition right now was important evidence for whatever came next. I handed the lead officer Theo's phone and showed him all the messages from Uncle Mike. He looked at each one carefully, taking photos of the screen with his own phone. He asked me to email him screenshots as backup and said this was serious evidence, not just a family argument. Derek tried to walk over and interrupt, but the officer firmly told him to wait his turn and stay where he was. Uncle Mike started talking loud about how this was all a big misunderstanding. He said he thought he had proper permission from both parents to give Theo a job. The officer asked to see his employment records and workers' compensation insurance. He also wanted to see the permission slips Uncle Mike mentioned earlier. Uncle Mike's face went pale when he realized they were actually going to investigate his whole business, not just this one situation with Theo. Maya tried a different approach with the officers, saying she was teaching Theo valuable work skills and that lots of kids help out with family businesses. The officer cut her off and explained that an 11-year-old working construction with heavy equipment and dangerous materials was illegal no matter what any parent said. Derek stood behind Maya with his arms crossed, not saying anything but looking more worried by the minute. I could hear the ambulance siren getting closer. It pulled through the construction site gates and 2 paramedics got out with their equipment bags. They came over to where Theo was standing with the female officer. The paramedics examined him carefully, taking photos of every mark and bruise while asking him gentle questions about how he got each injury. Theo admitted he dropped a cement bag on his foot last week. He said his shoulder hurt from carrying heavy loads, but he was told not to complain or he wouldn't get paid. The paramedics looked at each other with serious expressions. They told the officers they wanted to transport Theo to urgent care for a full evaluation and complete documentation. The police agreed this was necessary for the investigation. I asked if I could ride with Theo, and the paramedics said yes. The police stayed behind to secure evidence from the construction site and take statements from Maya, Derek, and Uncle Mike. Theo climbed into the back of the ambulance and I got in next to him. He was quiet and scared, asking me if he was in trouble. He wanted to know if CPS was going to take him away from both of us. I told him he didn't do anything wrong and that I was going to make sure he stayed safe. I was fighting to keep my voice steady, even though I was scared about the CPS visit that was supposed to happen in less than an hour. The ambulance pulled away from the construction site and headed toward the hospital. At urgent care, a doctor came in right away and started examining Theo thoroughly. A nurse stood next to the doctor with a camera and a tablet, documenting everything with photos and detailed notes about each injury. They found bruising on Theo's shoulders that matched carrying heavy loads. There were minor burns on his hands from handling materials. The doctor said Theo showed signs of being really tired and dehydrated. She asked Theo about the energy drinks and looked very concerned when he said Derek gave them to him every morning. The doctor explained to me that giving high caffeine products to a child could affect his developing heart and nervous system. While Theo was examined, I stepped into the hallway and called Principal Miles. I explained what happened and that police were now involved. I asked him to contact CPS and let them know this situation had gone way beyond a simple truancy case. Principal Miles sounded shocked but said he would make the call right away. He promised the school would cooperate fully with any investigation. He also apologized for the old contact information that stopped them from reaching me sooner. The urgent care doctor came out and told me she was completing a mandatory reporter form. She said Theo's injuries and the whole situation clearly meant child abuse and endangerment. She explained that this report would go to CPS and law enforcement, adding to all the documentation that was already piling up. I was grateful they were documenting everything so carefully, even though each new form and photograph felt like proof of how badly I had failed to protect my son. A detective walked into the urgent care waiting area about 20 minutes later. He was wearing a dark suit and carrying a leather folder under his arm. He introduced himself as Stanley Price and asked if we could talk privately while the nurses finished with Theo's paperwork. We moved to a small consultation room, and he pulled out a recording device after asking my permission. Detective Price explained that this case involved multiple potential charges, including child labor law violations, child endangerment, forgery, and possibly coercion or threats against a minor. He said the threatening texts alone were serious, but combined with everything else, this was a significant criminal case. I handed over Theo's phone, and he photographed each message carefully before placing the phone in an evidence bag. He asked me to start from the beginning and tell him everything that happened today. I walked him through the morning meeting with Mrs. Stevenson and Principal Miles. I described watching the security footage of Theo being picked up every morning. I explained finding the forged permission slips and the threatening texts from Uncle Mike. Detective Price took detailed notes and asked specific questions about the timeline. He wanted to know exactly who said what at the construction site. I told him about Maya admitting it was her idea and that they needed the money for her custody lawyer. His pen stopped moving when I mentioned that. He looked up and asked me to repeat that part about the custody case and the lawyer fees. I explained that Maya has been fighting for custody for almost a year and that she's been struggling financially. Detective Price nodded and wrote something in his notes that he underlined twice. He asked if I had any previous concerns about Maya and Derek's behavior with Theo. I admitted that Theo had seemed more tired lately and sometimes came home with small bruises, but I thought he was just being clumsy at the school. I told him about the old phone number issue and how the school couldn't reach me to verify anything. Detective Price's phone rang while we were talking. He answered it and listened for about 2 minutes. When he hung up, he looked relieved. He told me that CPS had been notified about the police intervention and was converting today's home visit into an emergency safety planning meeting instead. He explained that having law enforcement already involved actually helped my case because it showed I took immediate protective action once I discovered what was happening. A CPS caseworker named Nayeli Garrison would meet us at my house in about an hour to assess the situation and determine next steps. Detective Price said this was much better than having CPS show up expecting to find an absent child and a negligent parent. He finished taking my statement and said he would be in touch as the investigation progressed. The urgent care doctor came back with a folder full of papers and photographs. She explained that Theo was medically cleared to go home, but I needed to watch for any delayed symptoms from the caffeine exposure or physical strain. She handed me copies of all the medical records and photographs. The doctor emphasized that I should keep these safe because they would be important for both the criminal case and any custody proceedings. She also gave me a referral for a pediatrician to do follow-up care in a few days. Theo came out of the exam room looking exhausted. He walked over and grabbed my hand tightly. His grip was so tight it almost hurt, but I didn't say anything. We left the urgent care facility and headed to the parking lot. The drive home took about 15 minutes. For the first few minutes, Theo just stared out the window without saying anything. Then he started talking quietly. He told me what the past 3 weeks were really like. He said Uncle Mike would pick him up every morning right after I dropped him off at the school. They would drive to different construction sites around the county. Theo described waking up at 5 in the morning because he was so worried about being late. He said he worked until 4 or 5 in the afternoon carrying materials and cleaning up debris. Then Uncle Mike would drop him back near school so he could catch the late bus home. I kept my hand steady on the wheel and my voice calm even though I wanted to scream. Theo said Derek told him that if he said anything his mom would disappear, and it would be his fault. He said Uncle Mike showed him pictures on his phone of his mom looking sad and told him she would stay sad unless he kept working. The manipulation made me so angry I could barely see straight, but I kept my voice gentle. I told Theo he was safe now and that he did the right thing by not fighting when I showed up at the construction site. I explained that none of this was his fault and that the adults who were supposed to protect him had made terrible choices. Theo started crying quietly. He said he thought I would be mad at him for missing school. I pulled into a gas station parking lot and turned to face him. I told him I was not mad at him at all and that I was proud of him for surviving something so scary. We sat there for a few minutes while he cried. Then we continued driving home. We pulled up to my apartment building at the same time as a silver sedan. A woman got out carrying a tablet and a canvas bag. She walked over to us and introduced herself as Nayeli Garrison from CPS. I felt relieved that Theo and I got here first, so we were not walking into an empty house with CPS waiting. Nayeli was professional but not cold. She had a calm voice and kind eyes. She explained that she was here to make sure Theo was safe and had what he needed. She asked if we could sit down and talk through what happened. I invited her inside while Theo went to wash up and change clothes. My apartment is small but clean. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with a breakfast bar, and a living room with a couch and TV. Nayeli walked through each room taking notes on her tablet. She checked that Theo had his own bedroom with a bed and dresser. She opened the refrigerator and pantry to see what food we had. She looked at the bathroom to make sure it was clean and had supplies. Then she sat down at the kitchen table and asked me questions about our normal routine. She wanted to know about Theo's school attendance before this incident. I showed her his report cards and attendance records showing he had perfect attendance until 3 weeks ago. She asked about my work schedule and childcare arrangements. I explained that I work second shift at a warehouse and that Theo stays with a neighbor after school until I get home. Nayeli asked to see my pay stubs and lease agreement. I pulled out a folder I keep with all my important documents. She photographed everything with her tablet. She also asked for character references. I gave her the phone numbers for 2 of Theo's previous teachers and our downstairs neighbor who watches him sometimes. Theo came back into the kitchen wearing clean clothes and looking a bit better. Nayeli asked him some gentle questions about how he was feeling and if he felt safe at home with me. Theo nodded and said yes. After about an hour, Nayeli closed her tablet and looked at both of us. She explained that she was creating an emergency safety plan rather than removing Theo from my care. The plan included no contact between Theo and Maya, Derek, or Uncle Mike, except through supervised channels approved by CPS. Theo would need to start therapy to address the trauma. CPS would make unannounced home visits to monitor the situation. Nayeli emphasized that I did the right thing by immediately removing Theo from danger and cooperating with authorities. She said that made a huge difference in her assessment. Before she left, Nayeli pulled out a business card for a child therapy center. She scheduled Theo for an interview at the Child Advocacy Center for tomorrow morning at 9. She explained that this was a child-friendly facility where trained specialists would take his statement about what happened. She said the interview would be recorded and shared with law enforcement and prosecutors, so Theo would not have to testify multiple times. I was allowed to be present in the waiting room, but not during the actual interview. Nayeli said this was standard procedure for cases involving child abuse or exploitation. She packed up her things and reminded me she would be making unannounced visits. Then she left. About an hour later, Detective Price called my cell phone. He said they had secured the construction site and collected extensive evidence. The evidence included work logs, timesheets, vehicle records, and security footage from the site showing Theo working over multiple days. He said Uncle Mike's company records showed several other workers who might be underage, which could expand the investigation significantly. Detective Price also warned me that Maya and Derek had lawyered up quickly. He said I should expect this to get more complicated before it got better. He told me not to have any contact with them and to forward any messages they sent to him immediately. I thanked him and hung up. Theo was already asleep on the couch with the TV playing quietly. I covered him with a blanket and sat down in the chair across from him. Tomorrow we had the interview at the Child Advocacy Center. Then probably more meetings with CPS and police. Court hearings would come eventually, but right now Theo was home and safe. That was enough for tonight. I grabbed my phone and called Principal Miles right then, even though it was past 8 p.m. He answered on the third ring and I didn't waste time with small talk. I told him Theo was home safe and that police were involved. Then I asked him point blank how those forged permission slips were accepted without anyone calling me directly to check. There was a long pause before he admitted their contact verification process had serious gaps. He explained that the office staff was supposed to call parents for early dismissals, but they relied on the contact information in the system, which in my case was outdated. The permission slips looked official and had what appeared to be my signature, so no one questioned them. Principal Miles sounded tired and genuinely upset as he told me the district was launching an internal review of their security and communication protocols. He promised they would cooperate fully with the investigation and implement immediate changes to prevent this from happening to another family. I thanked him, but made it clear I was still angry about how this slipped through for 3 whole weeks. After I hung up, I checked on Theo again. He was still asleep on the couch, his face peaceful for the first time all day. I was just thinking about waking him to move him to his bed when I heard a knock at the door. It was 7:15 p.m. I looked through the peephole and saw Nayeli standing there with her tablet. She smiled slightly when I opened the door and reminded me about the unannounced visits she'd mentioned earlier. I let her in, and she spent the next hour watching our evening routine. I helped Theo with some of the homework he'd missed over the past 3 weeks, simple math problems that he worked through slowly. Nayeli sat quietly at the kitchen table, taking notes on her tablet while we went through fractions and word problems. Then I made us dinner. Nothing fancy, just pasta and sauce with some frozen vegetables. Theo picked at his food but ate more than I expected. Nayeli observed how I checked if he wanted seconds, how I asked about his day, how I reminded him to brush his teeth after dinner. She watched the bedtime process too, me making sure his room was clean, helping him pick out clothes for tomorrow, tucking him in with his stuffed dinosaur. When she was ready to leave, Nayeli told me she was satisfied with what she saw. She reminded me that these unannounced checks would continue for the foreseeable future, but that so far I was doing everything right in terms of providing stability and safety for Theo. After she left, I sat in the living room trying to decompress from the longest day of my life. I must have dozed off in the chair because I woke up to Theo screaming. It was 1:30 a.m. I ran to his room and found him sitting up in bed, tangled in his sheets, his face wet with tears. He was saying something about cement bags and not being fast enough. I sat on the edge of his bed and turned on his lamp, keeping my voice calm as I told him he was home and safe. It took almost 20 minutes to get him settled down enough to try sleeping again. I left his door open and the hallway light on. At 4:15 a.m., he woke up screaming again. This time it was because he heard a truck engine outside our apartment building, probably an early morning delivery. He was convinced Uncle Mike had come to take him back to the construction site. I ended up pulling a chair into his room and sitting there for the rest of the night, dozing in and out while Theo finally fell into a deeper sleep around 5 a.m. By the time morning came, we were both exhausted, but I could see he felt more secure being home than he had in weeks. I made him breakfast and we got ready for the appointment at the Child Advocacy Center. The building was designed to look friendly and non-threatening, with bright colors and toys in the waiting area. A woman with kind eyes introduced herself as the interviewer and explained to Theo that she just wanted to hear his story about what happened. She told him there were no wrong answers and he could take breaks whenever he needed. Then she took him back to a private room while I sat in the lobby, trying not to imagine what he was having to describe in detail. The minutes crawled by. I picked up a magazine but couldn't focus on any of the words. After what felt like forever but was actually 45 minutes, the interviewer brought Theo back out. He looked tired but also relieved, like telling his full story had lifted some weight off his shoulders. Detective Price came out of an observation room and walked over to us. He told me the interview went well and that Theo was very brave. Then he introduced me to a woman in a business suit who he said was Assistant District Attorney Roxana Noel. She shook my hand and asked if we could talk privately for a few minutes. I told Theo to wait in the lobby and play with the building blocks while I followed them into a small conference room. Roxana explained that based on Theo's interview and all the evidence collected so far, they were looking at serious charges. Uncle Mike would face child labor violations and child endangerment. Maya and Derek would be charged with conspiracy, contributing to the delinquency of a minor and potentially forgery. She warned me that plea negotiations would likely happen and asked how I felt about the possibility of reduced charges in exchange for cooperation and restitution. I told her I wanted them punished, but I also wanted this over with quickly for Theo's sake. She nodded and said she understood. Later that afternoon, my phone rang while Theo and I were eating lunch. It was Detective Price again. He told me that OSHA and state labor investigators had descended on Uncle Mike's construction company that morning for a full audit of all workers, safety protocols, and employment records. They'd identified at least 3 other workers who appeared to be minors based on the records, which meant Uncle Mike's legal problems just multiplied big time. The construction company had been ordered to cease all operations until the investigation was complete. Detective Price sounded satisfied as he explained this meant more resources would be dedicated to the prosecution. He called back an hour later with more news. They'd subpoenaed bank records for Maya, Derek, and Uncle Mike to trace the money flow from Theo's labor. Early results showed regular transfers from Uncle Mike to Maya, labeled as family support, totaling over $5,000 in the past 3 weeks. This financial evidence proved that Maya wasn't just allowing the exploitation, she was directly profiting from it in a way that would be hard for her to explain away in court. I felt sick hearing the actual dollar amounts, knowing my son had been reduced to a source of income for his own mother. 2 days later, I got a call from someone at the school district. They'd sent a forensic document examiner to analyze the forged permission slips. The examiner compared them to my actual signature on file and checked printer identification codes. The results confirmed that the signatures were forgeries and that the documents were printed from a printer located in Derek's apartment complex office. Security footage even showed Derek accessing that office on dates that matched when several of the forms were created. This evidence directly tied Derek to the forgery scheme and showed it was planned out, not just a spontaneous bad decision. The next morning, Nayeli called my cell. She told me that CPS was scheduling an emergency custody hearing in family court for next week. A judge would review all the evidence and determine temporary custody arrangements while the criminal case worked its way through the system. She explained that I needed to bring all my documentation showing my stable home environment, my cooperation with authorities, and proof that Theo was doing well in my care. Nayeli assured me that based on everything she'd observed, she would be recommending that Theo remain in my custody with supervised visitation only for Maya if she complied with certain conditions. I thanked her and started gathering every piece of paper I could find. Pay stubs, lease agreement, character references, Theo's old report cards. That afternoon, my boss called me into his office. He closed the door and asked me to sit down. He said he was sympathetic to what I was going through, but he had to point out that I'd used all my personal days and was now cutting into unpaid leave. If it continued much longer, it could affect my job security. I explained the situation in general terms without going into all the details. He listened and said he would work with me, but I could hear the concern in his voice. The conversation made me realize how bad my financial situation was becoming. Legal fees were piling up even though I hadn't officially hired a lawyer yet. Lost work time meant smaller paychecks, and I still had rent, utilities, food, and now therapy costs for Theo to worry about. I walked out of his office feeling the weight of everything crushing down on me. I got in my car and drove home on autopilot, barely remembering the route. When I pulled into my apartment parking lot, the sun was already setting. I grabbed my phone and work bag, trudged up the stairs to our second-floor unit and unlocked the door. Theo was at the kitchen table doing homework, and I forced myself to smile at him, even though everything felt like it was falling apart. I heated up leftover pasta for both of us, and we ate mostly in silence. After dinner, I helped Theo with his math worksheet, then sent him to take a shower and get ready for bed. Once he was in his room, I opened my laptop to check if there were any updates from Nayeli or Detective Price. That's when I saw it. An email from an address I didn't recognize, subject line RE Custody Matter, Hester V. Watkins. My stomach twisted as I opened it. The email was from Maya's attorney, and it was 3 pages of legal language that made my head spin. The main points were clear, though. They were threatening to file a countersuit claiming I had kidnapped Theo from the construction site without proper authority. They said I was alienating Theo from his mother and coaching him to make false statements against her. The email suggested that my actions could be seen as parental interference, and that a judge might view me as the one creating an unsafe environment. It went on to say that if I continued pursuing criminal charges and didn't agree to joint custody, they would present evidence that I was manipulating the situation for custody advantage. The whole thing was designed to scare me, and it was working. My hands were shaking, so bad I could barely control the mouse. I read through it twice, feeling my anger build with each paragraph. They were trying to make me look like the bad guy when Maya was the one who had my son working construction for 3 weeks. I immediately forwarded the email to Detective Price with a short message saying, "I just received this and didn't know what to do." Then I forwarded it to Nayeli with the same message. My phone rang less than 10 minutes later. It was Nayeli. She told me she'd just read the email and wanted me to know that this was actually good news for our case. I asked her how threatening legal action against me could possibly be good news. She explained that desperate attorneys send emails like this when they know their client's position is weak. The fact that Maya's lawyer was resorting to intimidation tactics showed that CPS wasn't falling for any of their excuses. Nayeli said the kidnapping claim was ridiculous because I'm Theo's legal parent and I removed him from immediate danger. She reminded me that law enforcement was already involved by the time I got to that construction site. As for the coaching allegations, she said Theo's statement at the advocacy center was recorded by trained professionals who know how to spot coach testimony. Nayeli explained that supervised visitation was still possible if Maya completed certain requirements. She would need to finish parenting classes, go to counseling, and show that she understood why forcing Theo to work construction was harmful. Nayeli emphasized that family reunification is always the goal when it can be done safely, but safety has to come first. She told me not to respond to the attorney's email and to forward any future communications directly to her and Detective Price. I thanked her and felt slightly better after hanging up. The next morning, I called around looking for a therapist who specialized in childhood trauma. The third place I tried connected me with Sophia Bailey, who had experience working with kids who'd been through exploitation and abuse. I scheduled an intake appointment for that afternoon. When I picked Theo up from the school, I told him we were going to meet with someone who helps kids process difficult experiences. He asked if he was in trouble, and I assured him he wasn't, that this was just someone who could help him feel better about everything that happened. Sophia's office was in a small building near the library. She met us in the waiting room and introduced herself to both of us. She had Theo come back to her office first for an initial meeting while I stayed in the lobby. They were back there for about 40 minutes. When they came out, Theo looked tired but not upset. Sophia asked if I could stay for a few minutes to talk. She sat down across from me in her office and pulled out a notepad. She explained that Theo was showing signs of trauma from what he'd experienced. I should expect nightmares, anxiety, difficulty trusting adults, possible regression in behavior, and challenges with authority figures. She said all of this was normal and didn't mean Theo was permanently damaged. Sophia gave me a handout with strategies for creating safety and predictability at home. Things like consistent routines, clear communication, letting Theo have some control over small decisions, and avoiding surprises when possible. She scheduled twice-weekly sessions for Theo starting the following week. I asked how long therapy might take, and she said it varied by child, but we should plan on at least several months of regular sessions. That evening, while Theo was watching TV, my phone rang from a number I didn't recognize. I answered, and a woman identified herself as a reporter from the local news station. She said she'd heard about a child labor case involving the school district and wanted to interview me about school safety failures and exploitation of minors. I felt panic rise in my chest. I told her I had no comment and hung up. Then I immediately called Detective Price. I asked if there was any way to keep Theo's name out of the media coverage. He said he would work with the prosecutor's office to request that any reporting avoid identifying details about the minor victim. But he warned me that high-profile cases sometimes attract attention despite everyone's best efforts. He suggested I not answer calls from unknown numbers for a while. 2 days later, I got a call from someone named Hassan Cartwright, who worked in the school district's security office. He said he was heading up a review of student safety protocols and wanted my input as a parent who experienced the system's failures firsthand. I was still angry at the school, but I agreed to meet with him because maybe I could help prevent this from happening to another kid. We met at a coffee shop near the school. Hassan brought a tablet and took notes while I walked him through every gap I'd identified. The outdated contact information that prevented them from reaching me. The fact that permission slips weren't verified directly with parents. The emergency exit doors that didn't trigger any alerts when Theo left through them. The lack of automated notifications when a student scanned in but didn't show up to class. Hassan listened carefully and asked detailed questions about each point. He seemed genuinely committed to fixing the problems rather than just covering for the district. He showed me some of the new protocols they were developing and asked for my feedback. By the end of the meeting, I felt like something positive might actually come from this nightmare. A few days after that, Detective Price called with what he called good news. The phone metadata from Uncle Mike's text to Theo had been fully authenticated by their forensic team. The analysis proved the messages came from Uncle Mike's actual phone, were sent during school hours on multiple days, and contained clear threats that met the legal definition of coercing a minor. He said this evidence made the criminal case much stronger because Uncle Mike couldn't claim someone else sent the messages or that they were taken out of context. The detective explained that having documented threats tied directly to Uncle Mike's phone made it nearly impossible for him to argue this was all just a misunderstanding or a family business arrangement. Meanwhile, Theo was continuing his therapy sessions with Sophia. After his third session, Sophia called me in for a brief update. She said Theo had disclosed some new information that she was required to report. Theo told her that Derek had specifically coached him on what to say if teachers asked about his tiredness or the marks on his body. Derek had told him to say he was helping his stepdad with projects at home and that he was just tired from staying up late playing video games. Sophia filed a mandatory reporter statement about this new information, which she said would add another layer to the conspiracy charges against Derek. Theo had also admitted to Sophia that he started drinking those energy drinks because he was so exhausted he could barely stand up by afternoon. Derek told him it was normal for construction workers to use them to stay alert. Sophia was concerned about the caffeine exposure and asked if I'd noticed any changes in Theo's sleep patterns or behavior during those 3 weeks. I told her he'd been more irritable and had trouble falling asleep, but I'd attributed it to preteen hormones. A few days later, I got a weird message through a mutual friend of Maya's and mine. The friend said Derek wanted me to know that we should work this out between ourselves like adults, instead of letting lawyers and courts destroy both our families. The message implied that if I dropped the criminal charges and agreed to joint custody, they would make sure Uncle Mike paid for Theo's therapy, and we could all move forward without more legal drama. I stared at that message for a long time. Part of me was tempted by the idea of avoiding months of court battles and legal fees, but then I remembered Nayeli's warnings about manipulation tactics. I remembered Theo's face when I found him at that construction site. I remembered those threatening texts on his phone. I didn't respond to the message. Instead, I forwarded it to Nayeli the next morning. She called me within an hour. She said I did exactly the right thing by not responding and by documenting the contact attempt. She explained that all communication had to go through official supervised channels from now on, and that any attempts at direct contact needed to be reported immediately. Nayeli said these kinds of messages are often attempts to get victims to drop charges or make statements that can be used against them later in court. She told me that Derek's message actually helped our case because it showed consciousness of guilt. If they really believed they'd done nothing wrong, they wouldn't be trying to negotiate dropping charges. Her guidance helped me stay focused on protecting Theo, rather than taking what seemed like an easy way out. About a week after that, Roxana Knoll called me. She said Uncle Mike's attorney had contacted her office with a settlement offer. Uncle Mike would pay $15,000 into a trust for Theo's future expenses and plead to reduce charges if we agreed not to pursue any civil damages. Roxana warned me that accepting a civil settlement now could hurt the criminal case by making it look like I was more interested in money than justice. She said prosecutors prefer when victims wait until after criminal proceedings are complete before considering civil claims. That way, defense attorneys can't argue that the victim is just trying to get paid. Roxana advised me to reject the offer and wait. She said based on the evidence they had, Uncle Mike was likely going to face serious consequences regardless of any settlement, and we would be in a better position to pursue civil damages after the criminal case concluded. A few days later, Detective Price called with an update on the labor investigation. The state investigators had gone through all of Uncle Mike's employment records and timesheets for the past 6 months. They found documentation showing at least 2 other kids who appeared to be minors working on various job sites. One was a 14-year-old who worked weekends for about 2 months. The other was a 13-year-old who put in shifts during summer break. Neither situation was as bad as what happened to Theo, but the pattern was there in black and white. Detective Price explained that this evidence would make it much harder for Uncle Mike to argue that Theo's situation was just a one-time mistake or family misunderstanding. The prosecutor's office was now treating this as a bigger case with more resources being assigned to it. That was good news for building a strong case, but Detective Price warned me it also meant the legal process would take longer. More defendants, more charges, more evidence to process. I hung up feeling both relieved that the case was solid and frustrated that justice was going to take months instead of weeks. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Maya and how she could have done this to our son. The anger built up inside me until I grabbed my phone and called her number. It went to voicemail. I didn't hang up. Instead, I left a message telling her exactly what I thought of her as a mother. I said she was selfish and cruel, and that I would make sure she never got unsupervised time with Theo again. I told her she didn't deserve to be called a parent after what she put him through. The words just poured out of me, all the rage and hurt from the past few weeks. When I finally stopped talking and hung up, I felt hollow instead of better. Less than an hour later, my phone rang. It was Nayeli from CPS. Her voice was calm but serious. She said Maya's attorney had already forwarded my voicemail recording to her office and filed a motion with the court. The motion claimed I was violating the no-contact order and trying to turn Theo against his mother. Nayeli asked me to tell her exactly what happened. My stomach dropped as I realized what I had done. I confessed everything before she could hear it from someone else. I told her about the anger and exhaustion and how I just lost control for a few minutes. Nayeli listened without interrupting. When I finished, she let out a long breath. She said she was disappointed but not really surprised. She explained that parents in these high-stress situations often make impulsive choices that end up hurting their own cases. The good news was that I had reported it myself before she heard it from the other side. That honesty would be documented and would help, but she warned me in very clear terms that I needed to be perfect from now on. Every single mistake would be used against me by Maya's attorney. No more phone calls, no more messages, no contact at all except through official channels. I promised I would follow the rules exactly. After we hung up, I sat there feeling like an idiot. I had just handed Maya's lawyer ammunition to use against me. The next morning, I called a family law attorney that a coworker had recommended. I explained the situation and asked for advice on how to handle communication and documentation going forward. The attorney spent an hour coaching me on proper tone, what to document and how, and strategies for avoiding giving the other side anything they could twist against me. It cost me $200 I didn't really have, but I left feeling more prepared. A week later, the school district held an evening meeting about their new safety protocols. Hassan Cartwright from the district security office presented the changes they were putting in place. The new system included biometric check-in verification, so kids couldn't just scan someone else's badge. Parents would get automated text alerts anytime their child was marked absent or left school early. Every emergency exit would be connected to alarms that triggered immediate staff response. The district was also requiring quarterly contact information verification with actual penalties for schools that didn't keep current records. Hassan went through each protocol in detail, explaining how it would work and what problems it was designed to prevent. Then he did something unexpected. He asked me directly to review the protocols and give feedback from a parent's perspective. I was impressed by how thorough everything was. More than that, I appreciated being included in the solution, instead of just being treated like a victim of the system's failure. I gave him several suggestions about parent notification timing and backup contact methods. Hassan took notes on everything I said and promised to incorporate the feedback. Walking out of that meeting, I felt like my anger at the school was finally turning into something useful. That same week, Sophia Bailey asked to meet with me separately from Theo's regular therapy sessions. She wanted to educate me about trauma responses and what to expect in the coming months. We sat in her office while she explained that Theo's nightmares and anxiety were completely normal reactions to what he had been through. She said recovery wouldn't be a straight line. He would have good days and then sudden setbacks. There might be triggers we didn't expect, like certain sounds or smells that reminded him of the construction site. Sophia taught me specific grounding techniques to use when Theo started to panic. She showed me how to help him focus on his breathing and identify things he could see, hear, and touch in the present moment. She emphasized the importance of maintaining consistent routines at home because predictability creates a sense of safety. Then she went over warning signs that would indicate Theo needed additional support, like withdrawal from activities he used to enjoy or talk about hurting himself. Her calm expertise made me feel less helpless. For the first time since this started, I had actual tools to help my son instead of just watching him struggle. A few days after that, Detective Price called with news about the forensic analysis of those forged permission slips. The document examiners had finished their work. The printer identification codes embedded in the documents matched a specific printer in the business office at Derek's apartment complex. Even better, the apartment complex had security footage of the office area. The footage showed Derek going into that office on 3 separate dates that lined up exactly with when several of the permission slips were created. This physical evidence directly connected Derek to the forgery scheme. It proved that this wasn't just Maya's idea or something that happened without planning. Derek had actively participated in creating fake documents with my signature. Detective Price said this evidence made Derek's legal position much worse. His attorney had been trying to paint him as someone who just went along with his girlfriend's bad judgment, but now there was proof he had taken specific actions to deceive the school. The bank records analysis came back around the same time. Investigators had traced every dollar that moved between Uncle Mike, Maya, and Derek. The records showed that Maya received over $5,000 from Uncle Mike during the 3 weeks Theo worked. Every single transfer happened within a day or two of Theo working a shift. But here's what really stood out. Maya didn't keep any of that money. She immediately transferred it to her attorney's retainer account or used it to pay rent she owed on her apartment. Detective Price explained that this showed financial desperation was a major reason behind her choices. She was facing eviction and couldn't afford her custody lawyer without that money. Understanding her financial situation made me see her actions differently. Not as pure evil, but as desperation mixed with manipulation and terrible judgment. I was still furious about what she put Theo through, but now I could see the whole picture of how she got there. That didn't excuse anything, but it made it more complicated than just calling her a monster. Detective Price called again a few days later with a warning. Uncle Mike had been making angry statements to his neighbors about me. He was telling people I had ruined his business and cost him everything. Detective Price recommended I stay alert for any potential retaliation. He told me to document any suspicious activity around my home or workplace, vary my daily routines slightly, and report any contact attempts immediately. Nayeli updated our safety plan to include these precautions. She also contacted Theo's school directly to make absolutely sure they understood that only I was authorized to pick him up. No exceptions, no matter what story anyone told. About 5 weeks after I found Theo at that construction site, Maya's attorney filed a formal request with CPS for a supervised visitation session. The request argued that maintaining the mother-child relationship was important even while the criminal case moved forward. Nayeli called to discuss it with me. She explained that supervised visits at a CPS facility could actually be good for Theo if handled the right way. It would let him see that his mother was okay while keeping clear safety boundaries in place. A trained supervisor would be in the room the whole time. I could be in the building, but not in the same room. Nayeli thought it might help Theo process some of his conflicted feelings about his mom. I didn't want to agree. Part of me wanted to keep Maya away from Theo completely, but Nayeli pointed out that courts almost always allow some kind of supervised contact unless there's immediate physical danger. Fighting it now might make me look unreasonable later. I finally agreed to one trial visit for 1 hour with a CPS supervisor present. The visit happened on a Tuesday afternoon at a CPS family visitation room. The room was set up to look friendly with toys and comfortable chairs, but there were cameras in every corner. Nayeli was the supervisor. She sat in a chair near the door with a clipboard. Maya arrived right on time. Her eyes were red like she'd been crying. She hugged Theo as soon as she saw him. Theo stood stiff in her arms, not really hugging back. Maya told him she loved him and that she had made bad choices. She said she was sorry for what happened. But when Nayeli asked her to specifically explain what she did wrong, Maya's answer was all about financial pressure and how Derek had influenced her decisions. She talked about being desperate and scared of losing her apartment. She never quite said the words that she had put Theo in danger or exploited him for money. Theo sat quietly on the couch the whole time. He answered questions with 1 or 2 words. He didn't smile. He didn't relax. When the hour was up, he practically ran to me in the waiting room. In the car on the way home, I asked him how he felt about the visit. He said he didn't want to do it again right now. Maybe later, but not now. I told him that was completely okay, and that he got to have a say in how often he saw his mom. Nayeli wrote up her observation report that night. She noted that Maya showed concern for Theo and expressed regret, but hadn't yet taken full accountability for her specific actions. She wrote that Theo was uncomfortable throughout the visit and clearly wasn't ready for regular contact yet. The report recommended continuing with supervised visits, but not increasing the frequency until Theo showed more willingness and Maya demonstrated better understanding of the harm she caused. 2 days after that visit, Roxana called me at work. She said plea negotiations were starting for all 3 defendants. Uncle Mike's attorney was willing to have him plead to child labor violations and pay big fines and money to make up for what he did in exchange for avoiding jail time. Derek's attorney was pushing for a deal with probation, counseling, and paying money back, but no felony on his record. Maya's attorney was arguing for a suspended sentence with parenting classes and getting supervised visits back. Roxana asked what outcomes would feel like justice to me while being realistic about what courts usually order. I told her I wanted them to face real consequences, not just a slap on the wrist. But I also knew courts don't always give harsh sentences to first-time offenders who plead guilty. Roxana said she would push for the strongest terms possible while being practical about what a judge would actually approve. 3 days later, the emergency custody hearing started in family court. Both sides had their attorneys and evidence ready. I sat at a table with my attorney while Maya sat across the room with hers. The judge asked me to testify first about what happened. I walked up to the witness stand and put my hand on the Bible. Then I told the judge everything about discovering Theo at the construction site that morning. I described the angry red marks on his shoulders and the energy drinks in his pocket. I explained how I immediately took him to urgent care and cooperated with police and CPS. I talked about the threatening texts on Theo's phone from Uncle Mike. My attorney showed the judge copies of my stable employment records, my apartment lease showing suitable housing, and Theo's perfect school attendance from before all this happened. She presented documentation of every CPS visit and my full cooperation with their investigation. I felt nervous the whole time, but I kept my answers clear and direct. After I finished, Nayeli took the stand. She testified about her home visits to my apartment and her assessment that Theo was doing well in my care. She described seeing our normal routines, checking that Theo had his own bedroom and adequate food, and observing how I helped him with homework and bedtime. Nayeli told the judge about the emergency safety plan she created and how I followed every requirement without complaint. She noted the unannounced visits she made and how the home environment stayed consistently safe and stable. Her testimony was professional and detailed. She had notes from every visit and specific examples of Theo's well-being. Then Maya's attorney stood up and started arguing her side. He said Maya was trying to teach Theo work ethic in a family business context. He claimed her financial hardship led to poor judgment rather than mean intentions. The attorney talked about how Maya had completed intake for parenting classes and started counseling. He requested shared custody with a slow transition back to Maya having more time with Theo. He emphasized that Maya loved her son and made mistakes under pressure. I had to sit there quietly while Maya's attorney made it sound like I was overreacting and using this incident to gain custody advantage. He suggested I was keeping Theo away from his mother unfairly. My hands gripped the edge of the table. My attorney leaned over and whispered that the judge would see through the spin. She told me to stay calm and let the evidence speak. When it was time for CPS testimony again, Nayeli returned to the stand. This part felt really important. She stated clearly that Theo had been subjected to dangerous working conditions at a construction site. She described how he was threatened to keep the secret and showed signs of trauma from the whole experience. Nayeli explained the nightmares, the anxiety, and the panic he felt. She recommended that I keep sole physical custody of Theo. She said supervised visitation for Maya should only happen if Maya completed parenting classes and individual counseling about her judgment and boundaries. Nayeli emphasized that Maya needed to show real understanding of child safety before getting more access to Theo. Her testimony was balanced but firm. She wasn't trying to punish Maya forever, but she made it clear that Theo's safety had to come first. The school district submitted a written report to the court. Hassan took the stand to talk about it. He acknowledged that the school had process failures that let Theo get removed from campus repeatedly without proper parent notification. Hassan testified about the new protocols being put in place. He described the biometric check-in system, the emergency exit alarms, and the automated parent alerts. He took responsibility for the gaps that helped this situation happen. Hassan was honest that the school should have caught this sooner. While this didn't excuse what Maya and Derek did, it showed the judge that multiple system failures occurred and people were working to fix them. Sophia provided a written assessment about Theo's trauma symptoms and treatment needs. The judge read through her letter carefully. Sophia's report outlined that Theo was experiencing anxiety, nightmares, and trust issues that matched what happens to kids who get coerced and exploited. She wrote that his recovery needed stability, consistent routines, and continued therapy twice a week. Sophia recommended against any custody changes during his acute treatment phase. She suggested that visitation with Maya should be slow and based on Theo's comfort level. The judge asked a few questions about the assessment, and Sophia answered them clearly. She explained that forcing contact before Theo was ready could make his trauma worse. After all the testimony and evidence, the judge took a 15-minute break to review everything. Those 15 minutes felt like hours. I sat there trying not to think about what would happen if the judge gave Maya shared custody. When the judge came back, everyone stood up. The judge issued a ruling granting me temporary sole physical custody of Theo. Legal custody would stay shared for now, meaning we both still had say in major decisions. But Theo would live with me full-time. Maya got supervised visitation 2 hours per week at a CPS facility. The visits depended on her enrolling in and actually attending parenting classes and individual counseling. The judge ordered a review hearing in 3 months to check on progress and think about expanding visitation. I felt relieved, but I also knew this was just temporary. The permanent custody decision would come later after seeing how everything went. On the criminal side, things moved faster. Derek and Uncle Mike got arrested and formally charged based on all the evidence. Derek faced charges of conspiracy to commit child labor violations, contributing to the delinquency of a minor, forgery, and child endangerment. Uncle Mike faced multiple counts of child labor violations, child endangerment, and coercion. The police took them both in for booking and processing. They each got released on bond with strict conditions. The conditions included no contact with Theo or me at all. No phone calls, no messages, no showing up anywhere near us. Detective Price called to tell me about the arrests and said both men looked pretty shaken up when they realized how serious this was. Over the next 2 weeks, the plea negotiations got more intense. All 3 defendants started to understand they were facing trial with really strong evidence against them. Uncle Mike's attorney worked out a deal first. Uncle Mike agreed to plead no contest to child labor violations and child endangerment. His sentence was 2 years probation, $25,000 in fines and money to pay back that would get split among the minor victims, mandatory labor law training, and a ban from supervising any workers under 18 ever again. Derek's plea deal came next. He accepted 3 years probation, 200 hours of community service, mandatory counseling, and a permanent ban from any childcare or supervision roles with kids. Roxana called to update me on both deals. She said these were reasonable outcomes given that both men had no prior criminal records and were pleading guilty. After I heard about the plea deals, Nayeli called with a recommendation. She said I should enroll in a parenting class focused on co-parenting after trauma. She explained that even though I didn't cause any of this, learning strategies for supporting Theo while managing my own anger at Maya would make my position stronger in court. At first, I felt resistant. It seemed like I was blamed for something I didn't do. But Nayeli helped me understand that showing willingness to improve my parenting skills could only help my case. Courts like to see parents who are open to learning and growing. I signed up for an 8-week course that met on Wednesday evenings at a community center. The class was called Co-Parenting Through Crisis, and it covered things like keeping kids out of adult conflicts, managing your emotions around your ex, and creating stability after trauma. 3 weeks after the initial incident, the school district rolled out Hassan's new security system across every building. I got an email explaining how it worked. Every student now scanned their fingerprint when they entered the building, not just an ID badge. The emergency exit doors got connected to an alarm system that sent instant alerts to the main office and security staff if anyone pushed through them. Parents got automatic text messages anytime their kid left school early or was marked absent from class. The district also made a new rule that schools had to verify parent contact information every 3 months, and any school that didn't follow the rule would get penalized. Hassan called me a few days after the rollout and asked if I would come speak at a district training session about why these changes mattered from a parent's point of view. I agreed to do it because talking about what happened to Theo might help other families avoid the same nightmare. Theo kept going to therapy with Sophia twice every week. The progress happened slowly, but I could see small improvements over time. He went back to his regular classes without having panic attacks in the hallway or classroom. The loud sounds still bothered him, though. Anytime he heard construction equipment or heavy machinery outside, he would freeze up and his breathing would get fast. Some nights he still couldn't sleep and would come into my room saying he had bad dreams about the construction site. But Sophia pointed out the good things that were happening too. Theo raised his hand in math class to help another kid who was confused about fractions. He joined the after-school dinosaur club that he used to love before all this happened. Sophia told me that recovery doesn't happen in a straight line. Some days would be better than others, and that was completely normal for what Theo went through. Maya finished 4 weeks of her court-ordered parenting class and started going to individual counseling like the judge required. Her supervised visits with Theo kept happening every week at the CPS facility. Nayeli told me that Maya seemed different in the recent sessions. She was taking more responsibility for what happened, instead of making excuses or blaming other people for her choices. Theo still acted uncomfortable during the visits, but he was starting to warm up to his mom a little bit. He would answer her questions about school, and sometimes even smile at something she said. I had mixed feelings about Maya being more involved in Theo's life again. Part of me was still furious about what she did and wanted to keep her away from him forever. But I knew I had to focus on what was actually best for Theo, not on my anger. If having a relationship with his mom was good for him, I needed to support that even if it was hard for me. Uncle Mike's construction company had to deal with a separate civil case that state labor regulators brought against them. The company decided to plead no contest to multiple labor violations instead of fighting it in court. They got hit with a $75,000 fine and had to operate under government monitoring for 2 years. The company also had to create and follow strict age verification and safety rules for every single worker they hired. Uncle Mike managed to keep his business running, but barely. The other families whose kids worked there were filing their own lawsuits to get money for damages. I thought about doing the same thing, but Roxana told me to wait until after the criminal case was completely finished. The 3-month review hearing happened in family court, with both sides presenting updates. The judge looked through compliance reports from CPS, therapy progress notes from Sophia, and paperwork showing that Maya completed her parenting classes and was going to counseling. The judge decided to extend my sole physical custody of Theo for another 3 months. But the judge also said Maya could increase her supervised visits from 2 hours per week to 4 hours per week because Theo seemed more comfortable with her now. Maya's attorney stood up and asked the judge to allow unsupervised visitation. The judge said no and explained that more progress needed to happen first. The judge also wanted to hear what Theo thought about spending unsupervised time with his mom before making that decision. Theo and I started building new routines at home that made both of us feel safer. Every day after school, we did homework together at the kitchen table where I could see him and help if he needed it. I put a list on the refrigerator with names and numbers of people who were not allowed to contact Theo under any circumstances. We came up with a safety word that Theo could use if he ever felt uncomfortable or unsafe, even if he was with someone he knew. We practiced different scenarios like what to do if someone tried to pick him up from the school without permission, or if anyone contacted him in a way that felt wrong. Going through these practice situations helped Theo feel more in control. He knew exactly what steps to take if something bad happened again. The routines also helped me worry less because I knew Theo had concrete tools to protect himself. Derek and Uncle Mike went to court 7 weeks after I found Theo at that construction site and formally accepted their plea deals. Derek got 3 years of probation, mandatory counseling sessions, 200 hours of community service, and a permanent ban from any job that involved supervising children. Uncle Mike got 2 years of probation, big fines that I didn't know the exact amount of, mandatory training about following labor laws, and a rule that he could never employ anyone under 18 years old. Both of them had to pay parts of Theo's therapy costs as payback for what they did. The sentences felt too light to me. I wanted them to face harder consequences for hurting my son. But Roxana explained that first-time offenders who plead guilty usually get deals like this instead of jail time. At least they had criminal records now and couldn't do this to another kid. Hassan reached out again and invited me to join the district's school safety advisory committee. The committee had parents, school administrators, and security staff who all worked together on making student protection better. I said yes to joining because I found that putting my anger into preventing future problems helped me deal with what happened. Theo's teacher also started coordinating with me about ways to support Theo in class without making it obvious to the other kids. She gave him extra time on assignments when he was having a rough day and let him take breaks if he needed to step out of the classroom for a minute. On a quiet Tuesday evening, 7 weeks after I found Theo at that construction site, we sat at the kitchen table working on a model dinosaur together. Theo had picked it out using reward points he earned in therapy for making progress. He talked about his day at the school and told me about a funny thing that happened at lunch. Then he looked up from the tiny plastic bones he was connecting and asked if we could go to the Natural History Museum on the weekend. I said yes, and watched him carefully fit the pieces together with his small hands. Life wasn't fixed and probably never would be completely. Theo still woke up with nightmares sometimes. I still felt anxious whenever he was out of my sight for too long. We still had therapy appointments and legal meetings on the calendar. But right now, in this exact moment, Theo was safe and healing and home where he belonged. The school systems that failed us were getting better. The people who hurt him were facing real consequences. We were building a new normal that felt more secure than before. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was a real one, and that was enough. So yeah, that's the whole thing. Nothing fancy, just life being weird again. Thanks for hanging out. It always feels like chatting with an old friend. We'll do it again soon.